All right. That's so weird. Maybe he says yes now. We've gone live. Tell him I'm just gonna invite him one more time. Hopefully,
All right.
this happens sometimes. Thank you all for joining us. We're trying to get Dale on. This is a very important story. Dale's been doing fantastic work on it. But right now, I have Evan Hill. Evan Hill is the investigative reporter of the Washington Post. Thankfully, they have kept him on and his fantastic reporting on, and he's followed up on Dale's fantastic reporting on this story, which I've talked about in the Left Hook. I've tried to keep it in the news. The story of Nurul Amin Shah. I was in Buffalo just a couple of days ago, and this community is still reeling over what seems like the death, the murder of Nurul Amin Shah, a 56-year-old Rohingya refugee who was killed by the system. Evan, I'll try to get Dale in, but I yield the floor to you. Uh, how did this man die?
So it's complicated, and some of the folks here in the community, I think, have done a good job, um, sort of situating his death as the result of multiple factors. But and we can get into that, because he was failed at multiple points in his journey to the United States and his brief stay here. But proximately, what happened is that Nurul Amin Shah Alam, who's a 56-year-old refugee from Burma, spent a lot of his life in Malaysia, came over here December 2024, arrested February 2025. We can also get into that. Um, is in jail for about a year before getting bailed out. And then the jail gives him to Border Patrol per an immigration detainer. Border Patrol takes him, realizes that he's a refugee, and in their words, is not amenable to deportation. And then at that point, crucially, they don't reach out to his family. They don't reach out to his attorney. They don't take him back to the jail. They take him to what they call a safe and warm location, which is a Tim Hortons, which people from the area will know is a coffee shop chain. And they drop him off outside. And what my reporting and Dale's reporting showed is that they dropped him off outside, sure enough, but the Tim Hortons was locked. He was dropped off at about 8:15. The Tim Hortons locks its doors at 7. So Nurul Amin is basically left to wander the streets. And 5 days later, he's found dead outside of the big arena downtown where the Buffalo Sabres play.
Folks, last Wednesday he was found dead, right?
Tuesday evening, they found his body.
So about nearly 2 weeks ago, Nurul Amin Shah was ordered released. His attorney, who did fantastic work, got him a plea bargain, and he was supposed to be taken from this jail cell by his family. But two border patrol officers, we'll get into it, picked him up, and as Evan said, they didn't drop him off at home. They dropped him off 5 miles away from his home at a closed Tim Horton shop at 8 p.m. Now, like I said, I was in Buffalo over the weekend. I gave a couple of talks. This is the community. I asked the Buffalo community, when he was released a week and a half ago, what was the temperature in Buffalo? And they all told me freezing. So here is a man who doesn't speak English. Here is a man who's a Rohingya refugee. Here is a man who was nearly blind, and he was released at Tim Hortons that was closed at 8 p.m. Before we backtrack, Evan, and explain just how he even got arrested, is this normal procedure to just drop off someone at an 8 p.m. at a freezing at a closed Tim Hortons? A person who doesn't speak English and who's nearly blind and has been in the country for a year, and most of that year has been locked up in detention?
I mean, those are all the, key factors here. This is a guy who didn't speak English, who was nearly blind. As you said, he'd been, I mean, you could see the difference in him in the video that we got from the Tim Hortons. He's got a gray beard and gray hair. When he was arrested a year earlier, didn't have a beard. His hair wasn't gray. I mean, the system had taken a toll on Nurul Amin. As far as procedure, I mean, I think this is actually still one of the outstanding questions that we would like to report and that Dale would like to report on. By the way, he might be able to get in now. It says waiting for Dale to join, but he can talk about this a lot.
Dale, if you're watching, just press yes. Get it. Try your laptop Substack or try your phone. I think the phone could do it. You go on your Substack on your phone. Continue.
Yeah. So, I don't think that this is procedure. And one of the complications here is that Border Patrol doesn't really detain people. That's what the immigration lawyers here say. Border Patrol typically they might put a detainer on someone, but then they'll transfer them to ICE custody because ICE is the one that has a lot of the holding facilities here. The infamous one is Batavia. And so his family and his attorney thought that he would go to the ICE facility in Batavia, and that's where they went to retrieve him. But he wasn't there, obviously. And so then this sets off, 5 days of frantic searching. They never knew, or they didn't know until Monday that he had been in Border Patrol custody. And remember that he was released to Border Patrol on a Thursday evening. So that's a whole weekend where they don't even really know what happened to this guy.
Folks, if you're joining us right now, I'm with Evan Hill, investigative reporter for the Washington Post, who I'm so happy that a mainstream publication has picked up this story. And the story was first reported by Dale Shoemaker in the Investigative Post. And if you're joining us late, I've talked about this on the show a little bit. I'm just going to bring you all up to speed real quick because this is how the criminal justice system works and intersects with immigration law. This is a story that should not be lost. Jail! Tell
Oh,
the man, the
hello.
myth, the legend. All right, take your time, buddy. That's good. You look. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. I guess it just doesn't work on my laptop.
Yeah, it just your laptop is racist against you. Did this fantastic reporting in the Investigative Post where he really broke this story. And Dale, I was telling Evan, I just got back from Buffalo. I was there just coincidentally over the weekend for a couple of talks, and this is just a mile away from where he was found. And that community is still reeling. And that community, folks, is not just the Muslim community. I'm talking about a multicultural, multi-faith community that is enraged and just does not understand, number one, how this blind refugee man could have been. Why was he arrested? Why was he detained for 15 months? Why was he not released to his family? And how he could have died. So, for those who are joining us, Dale, if you can you lead us through this right now? Let's talk about Nurul Amin Shah. He's a Rohingya refugee. Uh, when he died, he was 56. For those who don't know about the Rohingya, I've tried my best to educate them. Some of the most persecuted, stateless people on earth. There was a genocide. He survived a genocide in Myanmar. Him and his family get resettled in Buffalo 15 months ago. He's blind. One of these days, he walks out of his house. What happens next?
So he manages, I'm told he had $20 in his hand. He manages to find his way to a store in his neighborhood. This is in kind of the northwest corner of Buffalo on the west side in a neighborhood called Black Rock. It's kind of close to the river, the Niagara River. And in this shop, he buys a curtain rod because he is in need of some kind of walking stick. He does not have, the typical white cane that you might see a blind person use. So with this curtain rod in hand, he goes on a walk about the neighborhood, and he ends up getting lost. I'm not I don't recall exactly what the weather was that day, but I'm told the weather kind of turned bad, and he got turned around and he got lost. He winds up in the backyard. I was initially told the front porch. It was actually the backyard
Okay.
of this family on Tonawanda Street, the John and Tracy Ciccone. He enters the backyard. The dog gets out. He's kind of bumbling around the backyard. The lady later claims that like he damaged her shed door. He was just kind of like banging his rods around, and I think maybe like the shed door fell off the hinges or something. So they call 911. The police arrive. And according to the body cam footage that we were able to obtain, the police come in hot. There is, according to the body cam footage, no attempt to de-escalate the situation, no attempt to really even speak to him. They walk down the sidewalk alongside the house, they enter the backyard, and it's immediate from the jump. Curse words thrown at him and tasers pointed at him and, drop your weapon,
And
and
for
again,
people, it's important to know he doesn't speak English. He just landed in America. He's a Rohingya refugee. He's nearly blind.
mhm. You can hear in the video that he like has learned a couple English words here and there. But again, we're talking about somebody who really knows little to no English at all. And again is medically blind. His wife later described to us that when he was a younger man, he was totally blind in one eye and then had like good vision in the other. And then as he aged, the vision in his good eye, it got worse. And then by the time he is let out of jail, it is significantly worse, where he can hardly see 10 feet in front of his face. So I'm not. So all I have to say, we don't know, exactly like what his vision was at that point, but we know it wasn't great. Is the point here? So the police manage to they taser him, they tackle him while he's on the ground. He's like, "Oh my God, somebody's attacking me." He bites the officers. In response to that, they beat him, they punch him in the face a bunch, and they eventually forcibly handcuff him. Later on the body cam video, you can hear one officer saying like, "Oh, we might have to call ICE. Haha, get him out of here." So they're, more worried about the dog that escaped than they are about this fella. He ends up in the Erie County Jail, called the Erie County Holding Center, on charges of assault and trespassing and possession of the weapon, his curtain rod. He is then in the jail for more than a year. It is later explained by the family's advocates and at one point his attorney that they agreed to kind of not bail him out. He eventually has bail set at $5,000, not an insurmountable bail, but the family and the lawyer agreed that it's best for him to stay in the jail, in fact, because if he is released, there's an ICE detainer on him, or actually rather a Border Patrol detainer on him, which would result in ICE detention. And then he could be transferred to a facility out of state. He might even be deported to a third country under that program. So, hoping to keep the family together, they say, okay, well, he can stay there and we'll go visit him, which is what the family proceeds to do over the next year. His wife and son later describe, going there to visit him. The wife is like, I tried to bring him meals. I tried to bring him things. They would not let me. And so they are kind of forced to watch him deteriorate from behind the holding cell's windows. His wife later said he lost a lot of weight while he was in there because he did not have, according to her, access to a full halal diet. And like I said earlier, his vision worsened. He is then finally in early February, the district attorney agrees to, kind of stop fighting this case so aggressively. The rumor is that they were fighting so aggressively because he injured a police officer. And finally, after a year of incarceration, they agreed to say, okay, we'll give this fella a plea deal. He finally pleads guilty to 2 charges, 1 trespassing and 2 misdemeanor possession of the curtain rod.
Of a curtain rod, folks, used as a walking stick.
Yes. There's people in the comment section who say like, oh, well, he was waving those things around and threatening the police officers. And if you watch the video closely, what really seems to have happened is that they deployed like the taser netting to try to bring him down, and he doesn't really know what's happening, so he's trying to like get the netting off of him. So that seems to be what happened there. Anyway, so he pleads guilty to those 2 misdemeanor charges. An immigration attorney working on his case, you know, proactively communicates with ICE and says, "Hey, I've got this client. He's pleading guilty to these 2 charges. Does that make him, detainable and deportable?" And the ICE attorneys say, "No, we don't want this guy. He's a refugee. He's got 2 misdemeanor charges. We don't want him." And they say, "Great." They assume, and again, I guess because the Erie County Sheriff's Office did not entirely communicate this, they assumed that when he was released, he was going to get put into ICE custody very briefly. They were going to drive to the detention center and pick him up from there. I learned this was not in last week's stories, but I have since learned that the Erie County Sheriff's Office, we know that they handed him over to Border Patrol. They told me this week that they have no policy that requires them to notify anybody when they hand somebody over to ICE or Border Patrol. So
Wow.
I asked them, I was like, hey, did you tell the lawyer? Did you tell the family that you had handed him over to Border Patrol? And the answer was no, we did not. So he gets handed over to Border Patrol, which, upon bringing him to the Border Patrol station in the town of Tonawanda, which is right in the suburbs, they realize what the attorney had discussed with ICE, that ICE does not want this fella. So they then give him a quote unquote courtesy ride to a Tim Hortons coffee shop on Niagara Street, which is, I think, roughly a mile from where his old address was and 5 miles from where his current address was. Um, he is dropped off, according to the video that Evan and my colleague Adam obtained, and we see him wandering around in the orange booties issued by the holding center, and from there he is left to wander the streets until he's found dead.
Thank you for that just sobering connecting of the dots. Evan, then I saw in the Washington Post that you obtained the video footage that showed that the Border Patrol seemed to have lied in its original statement. The spokesperson, can you tell us what the spokesperson said in reference to how they believe they treated Nurul Amin and why they decided to drop him off at this Tim Hortons?
Yeah, it was basically sort of as Dale was saying, they describe it as a courtesy ride. And again, Dale has a lot of experience reporting on immigration out here in Western New York. I don't know what the policy is when Border Patrol gets someone who they don't want anymore. Do they just let them off at the side of the road or what? Maybe Dale can talk about that. But what we found in the videos, I found it jointly with Dale's colleague Adam from Investigative Post, is that Border Patrol calls it a safe and warm location, and that he agreed to go there. Well, first of all, how can a man who doesn't speak English can't really see and has been in jail for a year agree to anything? There's no evidence that these Border Patrol officers had an interpreter with them. Everything his attorneys are saying suggests that they did not. I doubt that they did. So how did he indicate that he wanted to go to this Tim Hortons? We don't know. We see in the video at about 8:15 p.m. This would have been on Tuesday a week ago, Thursday, that this unmarked white van pulls into the parking lot outside of the Tim Hortons, behind the drive-through, sits there for a few minutes. Guy gets out of the driver's seat, goes to the rear, unlocks the door, and lets Nurul Amin out of the van, walks back to the driver's seat, gets in, drives away. And it's very clear from the video that Nurul Amin doesn't really understand where he is or what's going on. He walks very slow. He's timid. He's looking around. He pulls his hood over his head. By the way, he's wearing the clothes that he was arrested in a year ago. They match. It's sort of, I would describe it as kind of light winter wear, kind of a jacket with a hood. And as Dale said, he's wearing orange shoes, which Mayor Sean Ryan here described as the prison booties that he was given in Erie County.
Yeah, they're not really shoes, folks.
Yeah.
They're just thin type of sandal type booties. Exactly.
So he walks by the drive-through. He kind of looks in through the window of the drive-through. He walks around to the front of the Tim Hortons. We can't actually see if he tries the door or not, but we do know from the employees who work there that the door would have been locked at that time. Security camera footage shows him walking around out in front of the Tim Hortons back and forth a few times. And then basically he kind of wanders off. He goes off through the parking lot, takes a final look behind him, and heads in the direction of a Family Dollar. We did go to the Family Dollar and ask them if they had security camera footage of him, and they did not get back to us. So we, at this point, kind of lose his track. And we can get into sort of what happens next. Honestly, we don't really know very much, but he spends 5 days on the street. We don't know how he gets from one place to another. We don't know who interacts with him. We don't know how he eats, how he gets water, where he sleeps. This may be information that comes out sooner rather than later from Buffalo police, but he ends up, I believe, Dale, correct me if I'm wrong, about 5 to 6 miles away, downtown outside the KeyBank Center, which is the arena where the Buffalo Sabres play, and is a place known to be, people who don't have homes often crash there, eat there, congregate there. There's a feeding center near a library a few blocks away, and he ends up on the street, on the sidewalk, across the street from the arena. A woman spots him at 5:30 p.m. On a Tuesday evening, sees him moving, doesn't do anything, comes back 3 hours later at 8:30 p.m., sees that he's no longer moving, and then that's when she decides to call 911, and when they arrive, they pronounce him dead.
And can I ask you, Evan, a quick follow-up? Do we have from the forensics office the cause of death?
No, and I think Dale and I both have tried to report on this. There was some confusion, and maybe I don't know if Dale has gotten any further information on this. There was some confusion in the beginning. Medical examiner has not determined a cause of death, but the Buffalo police initially said that they had determined that it was health reasons, not exposure, and not homicide. They came out and then corrected that report and said, actually, our investigation is open. And so this investigation is still open.
Ooh, okay. Okay.
There are homicide detectives working on it, even though it's not a homicide case officially. But cause of death has not been determined. I think, Dale, is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, and we kind of, we nailed down a little bit where that confusion came from. It was when Buffalo police were responding to the call of the dead body. They, there was also medical examiners or people from that office on scene, and there was kind of like some live discussion happening, and then in the officer's notes, that's how that confusion got translated out. Was
Oh, sorry, continue. I didn't mean to cut you off, Dale.
Yeah. The other two things I would note briefly here. One, on his movements between the Tim Hortons and the downtown hockey arena. There's a Republican agitator here in Erie County who's run for office before. She claimed publicly on Twitter that she had spoken with members of the local border patrol who claimed that there's quote unquote a lot more to this story, and that there's a lot more video showing his movements that will come out in the near future. I just wanted to note that because we have not seen any of that video yet. Border Patrol has not released any additional video, so if they have it, that has not been released yet. If anybody from Border Patrol is watching this, I would call on them to, in fact, release that video if you have contradictory facts to what we are reporting here today. In all of their public statements, however, so far, Department of Homeland Security and Customs and Border Protection, they've really denied any responsibility or involvement for in this death. They say how crazy of you to say that we had something to do with this when he died 5 days after he was last in our custody. So that's the first thing I wanted to note. You also mentioned that we don't know if this is a pattern of behavior. I can tell you that Investigative Post back in 2020 during COVID reported that when they were trying to do what do you call it, medical segregation at the detention center in Batavia here, they were releasing a number of immigrants from that detention center so that they could socially distance inside the facility. For those people who they were releasing, we reported at that time that they were simply driving them to a gas station nearby the detention center and leaving them there.
Hmm.
They claimed like, oh well, this is a bus stop, so we really just drove them to the bus stop. But in reality, the advocates we spoke to at the time, they said no, they're leaving them on the side of the highway at a gas station. You're just letting somebody out of ICE detention and leaving them there, leaving them to fend for themselves. No money, no possessions, anything like that. So in terms of, is this a pattern? We don't know a ton, but we do know that ICE in this region has done something similar in the past.
Real quick before I ask a follow up, Evan, can you remind us again, the spokesperson for Custom and Border Patrol? They said that they dropped him off not at a cold, frozen, locked Tim Hortons at 8 p.m. They said they talked to Nurul Amin Shah, who couldn't speak English. And where did they drop him off? What was it?
I believe, Dale, I believe they said a safe, warm location was the description.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Safe, warm location, folks. Nurul Amin Shah never made it home. He died 5 miles away from home. He dies 5 days later. Initially, they said natural causes. I just want to stress that there's an opening. This is great. I'm so glad I have Dale and Evan on because I was just really worried about it. I thought they would just say, natural causes, but nope, investigation's ongoing. I will not be surprised if it is seen that he was, dead due to the freezing conditions. And I will not be surprised if there is negligent homicide. And speaking about negligent homicide, there's every single step of the road, Dale and Evan, from his arrest to his detention to his release, seems to be a failure of the system. Tomorrow, I have Jen Budd on, who is a whistleblower, a former senior Border Patrol officer who has been following the story. She's going to come on with my friend Jessica Zwang, who's an immigration rights attorney. And Jen says, no, this is deliberate. When they see people with disabilities, people of color with disabilities, they're the most vulnerable. And there's a culture within CBP, like you said, Dale, kind of to go out of your way to make life a bit tougher. Just drop them off at the wrong place and let them suffer. And the cruelty is the point. But it's not just the CBP failure here. Dale, can you talk to us? Because I did a little bit of research on this. The Richard High of it all in Buffalo and how he intersects in this story. Because my
Sure.
mind was blown that this man still has a job.
Yeah, it's we've Richard High. This is actually funny. This is a little bit of how the sausage is made. When I was first hearing about this story, a little bit more than a week ago, when it was still, a missing persons story as opposed to, a death story. I was going back and forth with the lawyers who were representing Mr. Shah Alam, and I was telling my editor about it. I was like, "Oh, this is a pretty compelling case. Maybe we should consider reporting on this." And then his criminal attorney at one point says, "Hey, by the way, Richard High is involved in this, and he closed the missing persons case. I think that's totally inappropriate on Monday." I let my editor know about that, and he goes, "This guy again. All right, I think maybe we should, you should really try to talk to this lawyer and get the full story." So that kind of caught our interest. Richard High is a Buffalo police detective. He's now in the Special Victims Unit. He calls himself the Angry Cop on social media and makes various videos to that effect. He's had a little bit of a controversial past. My colleague Jeff Kelly is much more well versed on him, but I can give you some of the highlights. There's a law in New York. This is stemming from the George Floyd protests of 2020, where if a police officer in New York racks up, I believe it's 5 complaints against them, the police department is now mandated that they have to refer that to the attorney general for investigation. Mr. High got one of those referrals in recent years, and the attorney general came back and found, quote, Detective High was repeatedly discourteous and unprofessional with members of the public. The city also had to settle, I believe it was for $65,000, a lawsuit related to Mr. High's work, in which, and I'm going to forget the specific facts, but the offense involved him deliberately reversing his police patrol car into a parked motorcycle, which then knocked the fella off.
As one does, Evan and Dale.
Yeah, yeah. So he's a little bit of a rough guy who goes out and tries to be a tough cop, an angry cop, is in his words. So for whatever reason, he gets assigned this case. He does a cursory check of this guy's missing persons file. He sees an ICE detainer and he goes, "Oh well, he must be in ICE custody." Case closed. And it only took the case was closed for about 4 hours. The police department stressed to me, they're like, hey, look, the state police were still on this. If there were any federal and agencies, they would have been on this too. Nonetheless, the city search was called off for about 4 hours. What effect that had, we don't know. But the attorney was nonetheless very concerned and, called and raised hell and, got that
And
reopened.
that was Monday, folks, while Nurul Amin was still missing. Richard High, a man who is on the Brady list that prosecutors use for police officers with a history of abuse who are not seen as being reliable. That Richard High, who has numerous complaints against him, who nonetheless failed up and got a promotion. And like Dale said, has a show called Angry Cop that has 1.5 million subscribers, decided, oh, let me just I have, I think he's with ICE. Let me turn off this missing persons search. And for 4 hours on Monday, while Nurul Amin was still walking around freezing, the cops weren't looking for him. What does that directly correlate? Who knows? But nonetheless, it should have been a situation where all the police officers should have been looking for this man. That folks, he should have been home. He should be right now at his home in about an hour, opening his Ramadan fast. But he's dead. And Evan, it's one of those stories. The more and more I read about it, and the more and more I've talked about it on the Left Hook, I think I've done like one or two conversations. I have another one, and then when I went to the Buffalo community, the more and more people hear about this, there is a certain type of rage that I've seen like develops in people. Like their heart breaks, and they go, "This is infuriating. This man was killed. This man survived a genocide." And he couldn't survive 15 months in the United States of America, Evan. And it's one of those situations where he's not white like Renee Nicole Good. He's not Alex Preddy. And now we have a little bit of the videos, thanks to you and Dale and your reporting. But I did see, at least for a few days before, the war in Iran, where Democrats and Democratic elected officials were like, what the hell is happening here? We need some answers. What's been the follow-up to this?
I mean, I was almost a little bit surprised at how widespread among Democratic politicians this case got very quickly. And the response of the community, I would say, has been also outraged. The GoFundMe for the family is doing pretty good. There's been positive response to the family. Dale and I were both at a press conference that they held at a Rohingya community center on the east side this weekend, where it was very sad because his widow was essentially apologizing for him the whole time. She was saying, "I'm so sorry he wandered into someone's backyard and did what he did." Just sort of begging forgiveness and hoping people didn't think the wrong thing about him, because what she wanted to emphasize was this is a man who, after they fled Myanmar, essentially did manual labor in Malaysia for, I want to say, Dale, I can't remember the exact number of years, but maybe decades. Definitely a
It was
long
at
time.
least, I think it was 12 years at least.
It's basically scrounging and scrounging so that he could put together the money to bring his family. Finally did in December, and then ends up, arrested 2 months later. So I would say people are very mad. People want to get answers, and there are still answers to get. I would sort of emphasize that this is a person who was probably encountered by people during those 5 days he was on the street, who was probably captured in security camera footage. We can say, I can say pretty much certainly was captured on the security cameras of Keybank Center and an adjacent building called Harbor Center, which are owned by Pagula Sports and Entertainment. Pagula is the owner of the Sabres and the Buffalo Bills, and I can only hope that that footage has been provided at least to Buffalo police, who will then release it when the investigation is closed. I've requested it and have gotten no response. But this would provide us with some information about how he ended up where he did, what was happening to him in his last moments, if anyone encountered him on the street. I mean, we do hope to continue holding the authorities to account here. Part of the problem, as might be obvious from this conversation, is that the proximate authorities who need to be held to account are the ones who dropped him off at the Tim Hortons, and they're not answering questions.
And I just shared the GoFundMe, folks. It's in the link, and then those who are watching this later, when we publish it on YouTube and Substack, I'll link to it. They're looking for a small amount, 120,000. The good news is they've raised 109,000. So they're about $11,000 away. This is for his family. Again, this is a refugee family that survived a genocide, Rohingya refugees. If you haven't done any research on the Rohingya, just go look at what they have to face. They're native to the Rakhine state of Myanmar, but because they're a Muslim minority, they're stateless. They're not given citizenship. And in recent years, due to extremism there, and also led by extremist Buddhists, they've been seen as the boogie person, and they've sought to find any sort of refuge all around the world. So, in order to get refuge in America, it's a big deal. And he didn't last 15 months. He died. I would say he was killed. This seems like it to be a systemic failure. And Evan and Dale, going back to what you said, Border Patrol, or again, we have tomorrow Jen Budd, former Border Patrol senior officer turned whistleblower. Rarely is there any accountability for CBP officers, Dale. It's almost complete immunity. Has the outrage in the community done enough to get answers, or do you think this will just be one of those, it
Well,
happened?
I will tell you that for the last year, I have been reporting on ICE and Border Patrol issues and abuses in Buffalo and in Western New York, and nothing to date anyway has really changed. I mean, it's still, I'd say, once a week I hear some horror story about something happening, whether it's an abuse inside the ICE detention center, or whether it is something done by Border Patrol or something else. There's any number of lawsuits that are habeas corpus petitions that have been filed, where people make additional allegations of mistreatment. But in addition to Border Patrol, I also want to, especially not let the local authorities off the hook here as well. There is, and I would argue, for example, that it is the district attorney who has some questions to answer for pressing felony charges for more than a year on this case. He eventually agreed to drop those down to misdemeanors. However, it was the existence of those felony charges that kept him in prison for so many months. The sheriff's office, according to Shah Alam's wife, She claimed that he was not eating enough and was not provided with an adequate halal diet. I think those are some questions that need to be answered. We also have the additional questions for the Buffalo police. One avenue of reporting I'll tell you that I've been pursuing. The Buffalo Police actually have what's called a behavioral health unit, which is one of those specialty units of cops that goes around and, deals with squatters and deals with people who are, suffering, mental, psychoses episodes, and deals with people who are in the throes of addiction. And they go and they de-escalate a situation, and then they take a guy to the hospital. Try that one of those police units that tries to pull people who are in a dangerous situation out and gets them the help that they need. There are questions raised by people calling me saying, "Why wasn't that unit called? You've got a guy
Right.
who's acting confused in somebody's backyard. Why
Social
wasn't
workers.
that unit called?" um you know Additional questions: why didn't they not try to translate? Why did they not try to figure out what language he speaks? Presumably they would have access to some kind of translation app that might provide them with that ability. The other thing I'll note, and this is with regard to transparency in this whole thing, and this is kind of a quirk of Buffalo and Erie County. The actual court files in his criminal case have not yet been made public. In
Mm.
Erie County, criminal motions in a criminal case are not automatically made public, and I've been asking for them for days now, and nobody is making them available. So I want to kind of state that as well, that the DA, neither the DA's office or Mr. Shah Alam's attorneys or the courts, for that matter, are making these records available, which I will argue is essential for putting some transparency on this situation from the local level.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Evan.
I was going to add to what Dale was saying. When you look at the body cam video of Nurul Amin's arrest, I timed it out. The amount of time that elapses between the officer first issuing a command to him, basically seeing him in the backyard and issuing a command to him, she shouts, "Hey," and then they repeatedly shout, put it down, etc. Not that he understands it. The amount of time that elapses between that and the first taser is about 37 seconds. So there's no chance for anyone, most people, let alone a 56-year-old guy who's medically blind and has health issues, to respond to that. And
Who
if
doesn't
as
speak English?
doesn't speak English, as Dale said, if these had been behavioral health officers or just different kinds of cops, even perhaps, who had backed off, let things kind of settle down, it's possible, maybe not, but it's possible that there's no arrest and there's no felony charge. And as Dale says, the moment that he is hit with that felony charge, it's almost automatic that Border Patrol sees a charge of felony, not only felony, but felony assaulting a police officer. And they're going to say detainer, like there's an immigration detainer on that guy almost automatically. When he gets out, he's getting deported. Only after he gets out do they figure out he's a refugee. But if it had been de-escalated, who knows what could have happened. And I don't know if this is something that you also wanted to get into, but something I've heard in the community here too, as well, is, there's cascades of authority here of people who are responsible for this, but we do also have to ask questions, and people are asking questions about how he was settled in the first place, because now his family's on the east side. They're in a Bangladeshi community, a Muslim community that is far closer to them and can understand the language, first of all, than the community he was initially settled in. And people are sort of saying, if this guy had been walking down the street near the mosque where his funeral prayers were held, that Dale and I, went to, someone would have been able to speak to him. Why didn't he have a cane? Why was he not settled sort of more appropriately? And it's a hard topic, and it's obviously not their fault what happened. But I think that, we have to think about these people who are brought over and not given much of a chance.
Folks, go ahead.
The other point I would make on top of that one is, this is something I'm writing about in a story publishing tomorrow. There are thousands upon thousands of refugees from that specific part of the world in Buffalo now. I believe the number is more than 10,000 people from Burma specifically, as well as I think more than 2,000 Rohingya specifically in Buffalo. You would think, now we're not, we're a large city. But you're talking under 300,000 people here. You would think that the Buffalo police would learn, at least, and I'm not advocating for racial profiling here, they would at least learn what they look like. you would at least learn, oh, I think this guy might be Burmese. Oh, I think this guy might be Rohingya. There's enough of them here now. One would reason that a police officer would be trained to know how to recognize them if they encounter them in the community.
Folks, this is how the system works. Some might hear this story and say it's systemic failure, but Jen Budd and others who will be on tomorrow said, nope, this is exactly how the system works. The intersection of immigration law and criminal justice law, which essentially led to a death sentence for Nurul Amin Shah, who was probably marked for death the moment he accidentally went into a backyard as a dark-skinned blind man with disabilities. Why wasn't there de-escalation? Why wasn't there a social worker? Why not just bring a translator? Why respond with a gun and a taser? Then they respond with the taser. This man has no idea what is happening. They get him on trespassing, possession of a weapon. I always want you to remember that weapon is a shower curtain. Once he gets in the system, he never got out, folks. He never got out. His release was essentially a death sentence. They released him in the freezing cold. They dropped him off at a closed-off Tim Horton. They didn't contact his family. He walked around for 5 days, and most likely he froze to death. And also, I want to say before we head out, this is why we need local reporting. Dale did fantastic work in the Investigative Post, and this is why we also need great investigative reporters who have a privileged platform like Evan at the Washington Post. You work in tandem, and you see the multicultural coalition, the Avengers, work to have a local story become a national story, become an international story. And we're seeing now food deserts in local communities. And Evan, you don't have to say this because I want you to have your job. We're seeing what Bezos is doing to the Washington Post. Evan, say nothing. We'll keep you so you can just keep your job there. But without these two individuals, this story would not have been known. And this is not the only story. There's so many Nurul Amin. Just like if there wasn't cameras, we wouldn't know about Renee Nicole Good. We wouldn't know about Alex Preddy. Just like there was no video footage for Keith Porter, but thankfully there was local reporting, and we know that ICE also killed a Black citizen. So fantastic work, Dale and Evan. I'm so glad you're still on this. I'm trying to do my part because I believe this is a travesty. I think this story needs to go more mainstream. I think it has to, people should say his name just like they say Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy. I don't know if you saw the latest polls today, folks. If I may say, maybe I was right on this, and everyone else who's been right on this for a while. 50% of Americans, according to the YouGov poll, 50%, a record number, are for abolishing ICE. 50%. What we don't talk about, though, is CBP, Customs and Border Patrol. And there's two Border Patrol agents who picked him up and dropped him off, in my opinion, to die in frozen weather at a closed Tim Hortons. I got to run, and I promise I'd only keep it to 4:45. Dale, first, shamelessly promote yourself.
My name is J. Dale Shoemaker. You can find me and my work at investigativepost.org. We are a very small nonprofit news outlet, but we are nonetheless very aggressive, and we try our hardest to do really, really robust investigative reporting for the Buffalo and Western New York area. If that's something you care about, go to our website, throw us $5. Or at least sign up for the emails. Everything's free.
It's really fantastic reporting, folks. Thorough. I was very impressed by it. And then Evan picked up on it and stayed on it. Evan, shamelessly promote yourself.
Yeah, I would just say it was Investigative Post that broke this story, and it's because they've been doggedly pursuing the story of immigration under the Trump administration out here in Western New York. So folks should subscribe. Don't abandon the Washington Post. The investigations team is still doing great work, and we're going to stay on this story. So
and
thank you very much.
Posted, and I will post again in the chat section. I posted the GoFundMe page, and you all were kind enough in the last 5 minutes. You've raised $300. It's at $109,520. The family's just trying to raise $120. It's the least we can do if you have some money. If you have some money, this is where I usually try to be shameless and promote the left hook. Everything is free. There's no paywalls because I'm a terrible capitalist. However, the $3.75 that I would recommend you give to me during my special, go give it to Investigative Post and go read Evan's fantastic articles. Thank you to the 1,200 people who are watching. This will be up later today. This is the story of Nurul Amin Shah, how the system works, how CBP works, how immigration works with criminal justice to attack people of color, the poor, and the disabled. Nurul Amin Shah, in my opinion, folks, was killed. The system killed him. He should be at home opening his fast in an hour, except that he froze to death. And his name should be known, much like Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy. And the reason why I just want to stress this real quick, Sometimes all it takes is one person. It takes one story of one person to expose the system. When Senator Van Hollen went by himself to CCOT, he talked about Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Because of Kilmar Abrego Garcia's story, it was in the news. Because it was in the news, Donald Trump went negative double digits. That led to more exposure, more questions, more critiques. And then he was released, and Kristi Noem getting grilled today, the head of DHS, because of Alex Preddy, because of Renee Nicole Good's story. Now that number is up to 50% of people say, we want accountability, abolish ICE. And now we need, in my opinion, if I may say this, use this tragedy for some good and finally have some transparency into Customs and Border Patrol, who, folks, operate with complete impunity. So just keep the story alive. Thank you all for watching. Dale and Evan, I know you all are super busy. I really appreciate it. Come back if you guys have any updates next week, please.
Thank you.
All right.
Take
Thanks
care.
for having us.
Take care, everyone. I'll be back in 1 minute with Allison Gill, folks.